Hey everybody, I'm Jackson Dell, and today I'm going to be discussing the role of Genghis Khan's daughters in the Mongol Empire. The Mongol Empire did not become the largest land empire by Genghis Khan's influence alone. He had his generals, he had his administrators, he had his sons, he had his brothers, but one of the most influential helps that he had were his daughters. And funnily enough, they're usually they remain uncredited. While everyone else gets recognition, they're usually not mentioned or they're just an afterthought tacked on at the end. In my GMC Historical Research Methods class that I took in 2019, I focused my research on the Mongol Empire. And one of the books that I used during this time was Jack Weatherford's Genghis Khan, The Making of the Modern World. And I bring that up because my primary source for this speech is another book by Jack Weatherford called The Secret History of the Mongol Queens, How the Daughters of Genghis Khan Rescued His Empire. So, in this speech, I'll be discussing the role of Genghis Khan's daughters in the success of the rise of his empire, the role of women in general, and how both of these things affected the empire in the long run. So one reason that we don't have a lot of info, or a lot of people don't think about it for Genghis Khan's daughters, is because we lost a lot of the documentation of them. Their names are sometimes hard to figure out exactly. Different titles are used for them, and it's just a bit murky, sometimes because of censorship, sometimes because of just things getting lost in translation. But we do know that the women leaders of this time, the royal Mongol women, exercised more political power and held more territory than any other women leaders before them or since them. So this was the largest empire in history, and these women were the most powerful women in history. Four of them specifically I'm going to be listing in a minute. They ruled foreign countries, they commanded armies, they would sometimes fight, get in there if they needed to, and they knew how to ride on horseback, all of that kind of stuff. Even so, royal Mongol women, they still had feminine aspects. They weren't like these rough, crazy people like sometimes Mongols are portrayed as. They wore fancy clothing, ornate jewelry, big elaborate headdresses. They had all of that because these things that we may see as masculine, like the horseback riding, the shooting, the wrestling, that was not as gendered for them, and royal Mongol women were expected to do both of those, or all of those things. Both men and women were. Mongol women, royal Mongol women, also had some form of freedom that they were able to enjoy more so than non-royal Mongol women, and more so than most other women, regardless of status of the time. But I discussed their power, and a lot of their power did come from being married off to men, however. But I'll get into a second why it was still very much their own power. When they were married off, how it differs from other cultures is the Mongol daughters, Genghis's daughters, were not subservient to their foreign husbands. They instead became the sole rulers of that country when they were married over. So the four daughters that I'll mention in this are Alakai, who became the leader of the Ungud people, Alautun, who became leader of the Uyghur tribe, Checheyigan, who became leader of the Wirat tribe, and Tolai, who became leader of the Karluk people. All of them were married to a member of each tribe and people I listed, but they quickly became the sole ruler and held more power than their husband. Genghis's daughters, even though those names I didn't even know until very recently, they were far more valuable in the success of the empire than his sons ever were. Genghis valued integrity, strength, heroism. He valued all of that over lineage or gender, and this is seen in the way that he treated women in his policies. He was no champion of women's rights. He had 6 wives. He had somewhere around 500 concubines, but he did make it illegal to trade or like barter with women, um, and made sure to elevate them above property and show them that they were equal. And he recognized accomplishments of men and women equally, um, especially within his own family, but even with outside of his family. Um, he used both his sons and his daughters in marriage alliances, however, and these were when they would, um, when he would marry them off to foreign countries. However, as I stated earlier, when they were married off, they had more power than their husbands did. Um, the the husbands were so unimportant in the grand scheme of things that they were usually not even referred to by name. They were called the prince consort or the son-in-law, which it was a specific title called the Gurgen in the Mongol language, but they were very unimportant. But they had no social mobility, and they had no power that was not dependent on their wives. But they were given military leadership so that they had some form of command, but all the real power was held by Genghis's daughters, and he used this to expand his empire and exert further influence. His daughters would further the Mongol interests while also trying to protect their new people, because when they went to live somewhere, those people became their own. Alauton, the Uyghurs became her own people. In the Secret History of the Mongols, which is the most historically accurate um, account of Genghis's time, it is stated that Genghis Khan described his sole purpose in life as protecting and providing for his wives, his daughters, and his daughter-in-laws. In conclusion, it may often seem like Genghis was the sole mastermind behind the success of the Mongol Empire. When looking closer, however, it's clear that the success of the Mongol Empire was achieved through the efforts of the royal Mongol women who motivated Genghis Khan, the daughters whom he loved and trusted enough to put in positions of immense power over the largest empire in the world. Thank you.